Good evening. You are watching The Digital Age, and I'm James Goodale. You remember the Senate Intelligence Report, don't you? That's the one that Senator Rockefeller was on. It said that there was a huge intelligence failure in Iraq, but they didn't tell who was to blame. Tonight, we have a guest who's going to tell us who's to blame for the intelligence failure on Iraq. And his name is Tom Powers. Welcome, Tom Powers, for coming.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I would say that Tom Powers, please don't blush, is probably the most expert writer on intelligence in the United States. He is indeed the author of a current book called Intelligence War, American Secret History from Hitler to Al-Qaeda. But we're not going to talk about that book, but maybe we can some other time. We're going to talk about something that hit the newsstands recently. This is the New York Review of Books. And more or less, the title of your piece is Who is to Blame? And the book review is on this very same Senate report. Okay, now, let's see if we can explain to the audience what the Senate report was on. It was on, well, let's go back in time. Bush decided he was going to go to Congress to get a vote. And for Congress to be able to vote on something, they had to vote on an intelligence report. So there were members of Congress asked the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to deliver to it, Congress, a report and tell us why Iraq is a threat to us, basically was the proposal to the CIA. And as I understand it, from your review actually, the report consisted of 100 pages, and it was called a National Intelligence Estimate, which people refer to as an NIE estimate. Now what was that estimate all about?
An NIE is one of the basic products of the CIA. They're in business and they produce things. What they produce is paper, and it has many different kinds of names, but the important ones are NIEs, National Intelligence Estimates. That's where the CIA and other members of what they call the intelligence community get together, pool their information on a certain subject, and give you their best estimate of what the deal is.
And in a nutshell, what was their best estimate in this particular case?
Well, their best estimate in October of 2002 was that Saddam Hussein and Iraq had ongoing programs to build weapons of mass destruction, that it had stockpiles of chemical and biological arms, that it was increasing its activity, and in effect that there was a great and growing danger, which the administration sometimes called a gathering threat. Right. It said, this is a dangerous place. If you're determined to go to war there, you got a reason.
And this was all wrong. And that's why we're here. We're trying to figure out why it was all wrong.
It was all wrong. And it's very rare that people in the intelligence business are all wrong. I mean, this sets something of a record. There's nothing in that intelligence report was correct. And when we look at it now through the prism of the Senate intelligence report, you can see that it was very thinly supported at the time. We actually had vanishingly small bits and pieces of evidence which were ambiguous.
Okay, now I want to come back to that, but I want to ask you a little bit something that really bothers me about this report. As someone who's supposed to do I'm supposed to be doing a program on the National Intelligence Estimate as seen through the prism of Tom Powers and through the eyes of the Senate.
Sure.
I've never seen it. Have you ever seen it?
Oh, yeah.
You've seen the whole 100 pages?
Oh, no. The NIE?
Oh, you haven't seen the 100
I'm sorry.
pages?
No. That's way too secret. We don't.
Well, how can this be? No, you've written an article on a report we haven't seen. Why should we believe anybody in this chain of hearsay? You understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying, and the Senate would agree entirely that you shouldn't believe it, that there's not that much in it. But that's typical of an NIE, because there are things in there that they routinely keep secret, and have to do with what they call compartmented intelligence. It's the kind of sources, exactly where this stuff comes from. There's a lot of communications intelligence, overheard conversations on telephones or email messages, there are all kinds of technical stuff they just don't like the rest of the world to know about. So the details, the nuts and bolts are secret, but the findings, the conclusions, those are not secret anymore, although they were at the time. And now you can look at it, you can see what they said, and you can come to a pretty clear conclusion.
Well, now you started to say there were bits of intelligence that were put together in a mosaic, which perhaps shouldn't have been put together in the mosaic. Well, anyway, you say it yourself. what is the problem?
The problem was that we didn't know what was going on in Iraq. Now, when you do know, you have a ton of information. It comes from 12 different sources, and you really nail it down tight. But we didn't know very much at all about what's happening there. And in retrospect, now that we can see the report more clearly and that the Senate has actually looked at the intelligence they use, it's clear that we had no idea about the most basic questions of what was happening in Iraq. We had no idea that Saddam Hussein was being gulled by his own scientific and technical community. People were getting all kinds of money out of Saddam Hussein for imaginary programs that didn't exist. And Saddam Hussein himself had adopted a strategy for dealing with the United Nations. You remember at the end of the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein promised to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction. And the UN then started a regime of inspections, and it went in there many, many times looking for these weapons of mass destruction. And Saddam Hussein had a strategy for dealing with that. We thought the strategy was to secretly hide all his stuff and keep on working. Actually, his strategy was to stop. He did stop. He got rid of it. It was not there, none of it.
What I don't understand is how, if that in case is the fact, can a group of highly qualified people put out a 100-page report and give it to the Senate. The Senate votes on the report for all practical purposes, wouldn't you say?
That was the reason they went to war.
It votes on the report, and the report is all wrong. How can you, what did they do wrong?
Everything. They started off with a question. Why is Saddam Hussein being so defiant? Why is he giving the UN a hard time? Why is he giving the United States a hard time? Why is he refusing to let these inspectors go into his palaces or go here or go there and harassing them and all that? And they concluded, which pretty much the whole world concluded, well, he must be trying to hide something. I mean, there's an awful lot of hiding type activity going on here. He must be trying to hide something. Well, that was wrong. He was being defiant because he's a ruler who partly depends on the support of the people who see him as a towering figure resisting the United States and the West, that kind of thing. I mean, he had practical political reasons for being defiant, but not in order to hide weapons. So they were wrong about that. And then there had been programs that were real and that were dangerously close to success. So they wanted to know if those things had really disappeared or not, and they wanted to know if they were ongoing or not. And you got to remember, the CIA is huge, and it collects information all over the world. And it has many allies, and they help us out by giving us what they collect. So at any given day, the inbox of the CIA on any subject is stacked to the ceiling with bits and pieces of information. You look through there, some of them are going to say he's close to a bomb. Well, if you go through those stacks every day and you just pull out the pieces that say he's close to a bomb, pretty soon you're going to have 8 little things that suggest there's a bomb program.
Right, this is what you're talking about, little pieces of intelligence.
Little bits and pieces of things. Like the famous case of the aluminum tubes. He's trying to buy aluminum tubes, which is true. He's trying to buy them secretly because they're prescribed by the UN sanctions and the ceasefire that ended the first Gulf War. What does he want the aluminum tubes for? It now appears almost certain that he wanted them for what he'd used aluminum tubes for in the past, which is for rockets. And he wasn't supposed to be making these rockets, this type of rocket anymore, so he wasn't supposed to be getting the aluminum tubes. But he is trying to get them, he's trying to get them secretly, and these aluminum tubes are sort of like the tubes you might use in a centrifuge to make fissionable material for a bomb. So the CIA, but not a lot of other people in the intelligence business, all concluded that he was trying to build a bomb, and this was evidence for it.
So let me just stop just think of what happens. So that has to go in the report because that's what the CIA thinks.
Yeah.
And so it's in the report.
Correct.
But where's the editor? I mean, you're a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. Did you have an editor?
I had tons of editors.
Does the writer of the National Intelligence Estimate have an editor?
Sure, it has an editor.
Who is the editor?
Well, it depends on who it is for the particular report. I forget the name of the guy who actually handled this particular one. Somebody's in charge of bringing everybody together and sort of putting it into final form. And then the man who signs it at the bottom is George Tenet, the Director of Central Intelligence. It's his paper. It belongs to him. He has control over it, and he's the guy who hands it to the president.
Okay, well, now hold on. I just want to ask you about that because I don't remember reading. And this report, by the way, is that you're writing a book report on.
Yeah, in effect.
In effect. is 550 pages long. I will confess that I haven't read all 550 pages.
I did. I read every word.
Okay, so you can ask me.
It was a painful procedure.
Was the report given to the National Security Council?
Well, exactly who saw it, I don't know. It has a routing, slip attached to it. It's supposed to go to the National Security Advisor. It's supposed to go to the Secretary of Defense. It's supposed to go to the. I mean, it's accessible to a bunch of people. It goes to the White House, and then it also, in this case, it went to the Senate, to the Congress.
But I want to press you a little bit on this because I can't find anywhere a response by the National Security Council. Let me just explain for those who may be not familiar with it, and I'm not that much familiar with it, but maybe that puts in a good position to explain it, and you can correct me.
All right.
But the National Security Council sits as sort of the president's overseer of intelligence, could you say, in some respects?
Well, many things.
Many things, but including
intelligence.
That. And in the ordinary course, you would think in an important document like this, it would go to the National Security Council, they would meet on it, they would discuss it, and perhaps cross-examine the editor, or at least cross-examine one another.
Wow.
I don't think that process took place.
They weren't in a cross-examining mood. I mean,
no, but did they? Do you think that that they ever had a meeting on it?
The National Security Council, the full National Security, I doubt it. I mean,
well, that's what I think too.
They were trying to do something else with it.
Okay, but the president got it. Well, the president didn't read it.
No, he might have read the findings, but he's famous for not reading and listening to people and letting them tell him what's in a piece of paper.
That's a strange process because people who are in the writing business, and I'm a sometime writer and a lawyer, we all go through the process of being challenged about what it is that we produce, but I don't see that the challenge was up here. Let me ask you.
There were plenty of challenges, but
really?
they were the opposite way. There were challenges if you wanted to leave something out.
Oh,
it's not.
You know what I mean. I'm not that kind of challenge. But let me ask you another area. You talk about tubes in your article, which, by the way, everyone should go out and read and buy New York Review of Books. It's on the stands right now.
That'll make my editor happy.
Right now, and buy your other book too. But read this article. You talk about the aluminum tubes in there.
Yeah.
And the other area you principally talk about is what has become known as yellow cake.
Right.
Now, yellow cake, as I understand, is a form of uranium that's used, correct me if I'm wrong, it's useful in the production of atomic bombs, and you buy it frequently in an African country called Niger.
Yep.
And tell me the rest of the story.
Yellow cake is a source of, potentially a source of fissionable material. And in order, the big thing about a bomb, the hard thing about a bomb, the reason why every little country in the world doesn't have a bomb is because it's hard to make the fissionable material. That's the big stumbling block. And it's, thank goodness, or everyone would have had one in World War II, and heaven only knows where we would have been. But the yellow cake from Niger is strongly controlled there, strictly controlled there by international agreements of many kinds, and by the fact that the people of Niger don't actually control personally, directly, the company that mines and processes and sells yellow cake. I think there's a French company or a French-Belgian company that actually handles all this stuff. Somewhere back in the early part of this millennium, the British picked up information, apparently, that Iraq had gone to Niger in the hope of purchasing some yellow cake. Now, what the British actually heard and who they heard it from and how they got this information is still unknown, but they shared it with their friends, the Americans, which the British do. And that seemed to be evidence that Iraq was actively pursuing a nuclear weapons program.
Right, and this came to the attention of the American public in the State of the Union address by Bush.
But far down the road.
But this is the big enchilada in what, 2003, and you're talking before that, I realize, but I just wanted to...
That's the beginning of this little report.
Right.
And it got bandied back and forth in the United States, and there were a lot of people who were full of doubt about this. And it was never proven, and eventually in the end it turned out they weren't trying to buy yellow cake. There's very little real solid evidence for it. But the claim that the British had found evidence that Iraq was trying to buy as much as 500 tons of yellow cake uranium ore appeared in the President's State of the Union address in 2002.
2002, was it?
Yeah. And that was the beginning of the year where they were planning to go to war against Iraq. If you go back and read that State of the Union address, everything that's happened since is laid out there perfectly clearly. It's no big secret, what he wants to do, who he's mad at, and what he intends to do about it. So anyway, that yellow cake was found there. But by that time, the evidence for it was not only extremely shaky and thin, it included a lot of fabricated documents. And the CIA had access to these documents, but did not insist on getting its own copies, never made a serious study of whether they were fabricated or genuine, although the State Department had said, there's something fishy about this paper here. We don't trust it. We don't think it's really true. And it got into the president's speech, and almost immediately thereafter, the fabrication of the documents became apparent because they finally had to share them with the United Nations inspectors. And the United Nations inspectors, in one day, I believe in the morning after they received these papers, said, these are forgeries. And they're not only that, they're not hard forgeries to penetrate. They're obvious forgeries.
Okay, I want to pin this down. This is something I don't understand.
Okay.
And now we're trying to talk about the CIA and its responsibility. I know you've got another target here, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Wow.
But on yellow cake.
Yeah.
In the report that's been released to the public, of the report that we can't see,
yeah,
it says that that the Iraq government has been vigorously trying to purchase yellow
vigorously,
cake. And that was delivered to the Senate, refresh your recollection, in October 1, 2002.
Right.
On the very same date, there was the preparation for a speech that Bush was giving in Cincinnati 4 days later. And in it he says, or tried to say before it was taken out, the very same thing that's in the report that's given to the Senate, on which our representatives are voting. And it goes up to the CIA, and they say, you can't say that in the speech. And so Bush takes it out, but it's still in the report that goes to Congress, on which people are voting.
And it gets into a State of the Union address.
But how? What is going on in the CIA? How do they permit that to happen?
Now we got to start talking about large general subjects that help to explain the nature of the event.
Right.
You got to understand who the CIA works for. It doesn't work for the Congress, and although it's paid by you and me, it doesn't work for us. It doesn't work for the Defense Department. It works for the President in the White House directly, and it always has. That's its strength, and that is its weakness. And because it works for him, it can't long resist anything that a president wants or a president believes. Because if they do seriously resist and do seriously disagree, they're just going to be nudged aside, and somebody else is going to move in to fill that space and fill that vacuum. So every time you come to a hard nut here of stuff that's hard to understand about how we reached intelligence conclusions that we did before going to war in Iraq, and that includes the yellow cake story and other stories as well. You've always got to understand that from the beginning, from minute one after 9/11, President Bush knew he wanted to do something about Iraq. Specifically, he wanted to change the government there. And everything else follows is a matter of course. So, yellow cake. That's a scary story. We need scary stories in order to convince people that going to war is justified and necessary. You got to have those scary stories. Who gives them to us? The CIA gives them to us. You go to the CIA, nobody goes to them and says, give us all the scary stories. Don't give any reassuring stories. You don't have to tell them that. They're smart enough to know what the president's trying to do. So in effect, it all begins to be filtered through. But there is a natural, hard kernel of honesty in the people who are in the intelligence business, and they resist certain kinds of exaggeration and mistakes. They always have a very clear idea about these things, but they don't try and tell presidents what to do. That's not their job. So, but at the same time, they resist having stuff misused. Now, the CIA knew this yellow cake story was fishy from the start. And on several occasions, they actually stopped it, or they just put a block between the president and that story. But after a while, they get worn down. This was a lot of pressure. They wanted to go to war. They had to have a reason for war. The only reason for war was weapons of mass destruction. And eventually, the CIA just stopped resisting. And the yellow cake story is a classic example of it.
Okay, so now, in order to make this theory work of yours, in some part, not entirely, but in some part, don't you have to show some proof of the pressure on the CIA to change their stories, or pressure on the CIA to give up, as you've just said? Isn't that essential for the? I mean, I mean, there's no great secret, Tom, that you think Bush is responsible for
Well,
9/11 for the Iraq War. I mean, we'll answer the question before we get to the answer period. But in order to see what's wrong with my reasoning. In order to make Bush responsible, you have to have some sort of connection to the CIA directly, don't you?
Look at their behavior.
As lawyers say, proof.
Okay.
But maybe not lawyers.
It's not a piece of paper. You look at their behavior. What you actually have here is no change in facts about the yellow cake story. There's no claim that the CIA once believed it and then dropped its belief. Everything we know about it suggests that from the very beginning they were skeptical of this story. But they resisted less and less, and eventually they stopped resisting. Their behavior says they're under pressure. They weren't persuaded that it was true, it's their behavior. Now, the great all-purpose proof here of White House pressure on the CIA to deliver WMD is the president himself. Now just imagine for a second that the president actually didn't know what to do. And he went to the CIA and said, I don't know if I should invade this place or not. Could cause a lot of trouble. Do you think it's necessary? And the CIA came back and said, Mr. President, it's absolutely necessary. It's a slam dunk. The guy's building nukes and all kinds of other terrible stuff. You got to go in there. So they go in there and they find nothing. You got to dwell on that word nothing for a minute. It's not like they found something or not quite as much as they said. They just didn't find any.
Okay, but let me just stop
you. No, wait.
I'm sorry.
Let me just finish that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What's the president? Is the president serene and tranquil about this? Or does he get a little angry? You told me that I had to go to war and there was none of it there? The president has never been angry. He has never criticized George Tenet. He has never criticized the CIA. He has only expressed complete confidence at what it thought. Now, I just deduce from that he understood what was happening, and that in fact he knows he's the one who wanted to go forward. And I also deduce from that, as a practical matter, that if he were to start to get angry, they would start to slip off the reservation.
Well, that's sad commentary on the CIA.
They work for the president.
No, but
you're a lawyer. You got people in your office. You know, if they really get out of sync with you, they're going to have to go down the road.
Now, George Bush's father had this view, because he was once the CIA director.
Yeah.
That the CIA should not be political. And if you go back and think about what was going to happen at the beginning of W's administration, you know, Rumsfeld was going to be the CIA director. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah. And I think I'm now deducing that his father said, well, that's political. You shouldn't change. So they kept Tenet in there to make the spot non-political. But you say nonetheless that has the CIA, you're a big expert on the CIA. Has the CIA always been political?
Well, yeah. I mean, everything in Washington is political. That's just part of the landscape, but not necessarily in a way that you can avoid. The question is, are you political with wisdom? Are you political with moderation and in a sober way? Are you political in a serious way? Not just are you political. Of course, it's political. These things happen.
I'm feeling very depressed. Now,
I'm sorry.
We have to share with the audience that you and I are both Yale men.
That's true.
And that the CIA's intellectual father was a fellow named Sherman Kemp.
Yep.
Who was a Yale professor. I don't think he was a full professor. And he laid the groundwork for the integrity of what is written. You're a writer, lawyers write, we want to be honest.
Yep.
I can't believe that the analysts aren't trying to be honest when they put together the report of what they know, and that report then is edited by someone, we don't know who it is, in 100-page, and that they're all sitting there and they know it's not true. How can that be? Can't we count on them?
No.
We can't count on the people. We can't. I thought we could always count on writers. We can't trust the intelligence writers in the CIA.
Not in the way that you're implying. In other words,
Really?
They are not going to be the ones to stand up and say, hey, you're trying to make us say stuff that isn't so, and go public with it. You got to be prepared to go public, because otherwise it doesn't really count. They just push you aside, bring in somebody else.
Right.
When you go public, your career's over. Not only that, you're drummed out of the community. You're supposed to be disciplined. This is a disciplined organization, and it works for the White House. So you can't really count on them to say, at an early stage or in any situation with even a trace of ambiguity, this is all wrong. But they basically know what's going on. Now, they did not know that when the inspectors got in there, they would find nothing. I think they were depending on a miracle. What they
Do you think they actually, the guys who were running the report were depending on a miracle?
I do.
Really?
I think they
That's
knew
a lot of people, though. How many
they
people?
knew their case was weak.
How many people wrote that report, do you think?
Well, probably a couple of hundred, but in all, you know,
That's a
who
lot.
fed information in the direction of the people
of-
who were doing it and putting it together. There are a lot of people who sort of know what's happening
Do you
or are
think
monitoring the
part
flow.
of the problem is that when you're a CIA analyst,
Yeah.
and that's the person who works with the case officers, understand it, you're the best.
Well, not exactly.
Well, more or less. The
yeah,
information,
more or less.
I'm trying to get the information chain.
Yeah.
Comes to the analyst. The analyst sits there, and unlike you, who wish to defend the truth of what you write,
Yeah.
in addition to your opinions, the analyst is sort of like von Braun. They shoot up the rockets with respect to what they got and where they land. They don't care. In other words, they get some information from X. That there's yellow cake, and they write down information just like reporters do sometimes to get criticized. Now, I heard today there is yellow cake. Then they put in the report, I heard there is yellow cake, but they don't stand behind the veracity of what they've been told. Is that part of the problem?
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
I would be nice. I'd be nice to the analysts.
yeah.
You don't want to
I
be
mean,
as nice.
well,
you don't
no.
want to be as nice to them.
I'm perfectly prepared to be nice to analysts. I respect the integrity with which they go about their work or attempt to go about their work. They know what they're doing. They understand when a case is strong and when a case is weak.
Yeah.
But the people who are analyzing things at the lower level are not the people who are writing the NIE at the upper level.
Right.
Everything begins to get out of control, and the center of gravity shifts from the facts and the people who collect it
Right.
at the lower level in the direction of the White House at the upper level. It's like the pull of the Earth and the Moon, you know, against the sun. It's that kind of thing.
All right,
so
well,
the analysts know when they've got a weak case, but they're not in a position to sort of blow the whistle on it. If somebody wants to take a weak case, I mean, that's a line they can't cross.
Well, guess what? We've come to the end.
Really?
And who is responsible for the intelligence failure in Iraq?
Well, there's a one-word answer.
Yeah.
Bush.
Thank you very much, Tom Powers, for coming
pleasure.
by. And thank you for coming by. And come by next week to learn more about the digital age. For the digital age, I'm James Goodale. Good night.